Uh, th- Thanks, Ayana. My name is Tom Huggett. I'm a family doctor, and I work at Lundell Christian Health Center. I used to work at Circle Family Healthcare here in Austin, and I live in Austin at Lake and Central. And this certainly is something that I've seen as a family doctor working in Austin on the west side. Certainly, I was treating kids with lead poisoning in the 1990s when it was much more prevalent. But I think that we are still seeing problems with lead, and what we really have to there are a couple of things that we have to realize. Even though there are fewer children with high levels of lead that require medication, we still know that there is no real safe lead level. And so when we try to do a little research on this, we look at the Centers for Disease Control, for example, and they really say a couple of different things to us, especially how it affects children. And we kind of wanted to focus on children just for a little bit because that's when brains develop. We know that developing brains can be very sensitive to external environmental effects, and lead is one of those toxins. So what we know is that according to the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, we know that exposure to lead can seriously harm a child's health and causes well-documented adverse effects. This includes damage to brain and nervous system, slowed growth and development, learning and behavioral problems, and even hearing and speech problems. It's been documented that elevated lead levels can actually lower a person's or a kid's IQ, decrease their ability to pay attention. So you have to wonder, well, we have all these kids that are being diagnosed with ADHD. How much of this is really actually due to their exposure to lead and underperformance in schools? So we really know that that lead, there's probably a big correlation between exposure to lead and children's development and their behavior. So I strongly support Rep. Ford's efforts. I have to say, I live in a two-flat here in Austin, and I know, how you had this option to get your water meter? So I got my water meter installed. So I'm just kind of wondering, that's when those water meters were installed is when they saw those high, those high lead levels. So I'm kind of wondering what happened with my personal lead level and what happened to the lead level of my tenants on the second floor. I guess when we look at the west side has also been strongly affected by this. So as a homeowner in Austin, as a doctor treating kids in Austin and East and West Garfield Park, I really believe that this is an important topic, and I really applaud Rep. Ford and the coalition that he's brought together to really work on this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Huggett. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I see, I talked to the city of Chicago today, and they called and they said that they want to work with us on getting the lead out in communities, but it's going to be very difficult and costly. They did advise us to let people know that they should flush their pipes out, first thing in the morning, make sure that when they run the water, they should run it to make sure that the water in the pipes is not sitting there because that's where the lead is going to be, but to continue to run the water and let the water run for 5 minutes, and then there should be no lead in those pipes. I said, no lead? They said, well, very little lead. And they said it'd be very difficult to eliminate all lead. I say, difficult? I said, we're not worried about difficult. We just want to do it. And so the mayor's office has given us a commitment to work with us on the west side, especially in Austin, to have a pilot at least to make sure that we're able to bring money to the west side to eliminate lead poisoning in the Austin community. And the last thing I would say is children have so many challenges and we wonder why. Well, born into a community where not only is there lead in the water at home, but even our schools and daycare centers have been known to have lead in the water. Thank God the paint, for the most part, is no longer a lead base. So that's good, but there is still some cases where some of our schools on the west side are old and there's lead in those buildings. So I think that people in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, especially the west side, we have to do everything that we can to be advocates to get the lead out. And there's going to be lots of resources laid out there in the state and in the city to do just that. And today's town hall meeting is going to talk about ways that we can have cleaner water in the city of Chicago, right?
Sorry, I'm trying to get this PowerPoint back up. Okay. So today, again, my name is Ayana. I work with Illinois Environmental Council doing their water policy and advocacy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about lead, how does it get in our water, and how we can get the lead out. So a little bit about IUC. We've been around for about 45 years. We started in the 1970s when we realized that we needed an actual singular, powerful voice for the environmental community in Springfield. And so fast forward to today, that mission is still the same. We represent about 90 different environmental groups. And part of our work is being the eyes, ears, and voice for the environment in Springfield. So I'm not going to go through every single group that we represent, but we have several different groups, a few that are local to Chicago. So we have the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, we have Faith in Place, we have NRDC, and we have also the Southeast Environmental Task Force. So we have folks from all over working on different things that range on the different environmental issues. And so what does IEC do? We do a lot, but a lot of our work is policy driven and policy focused. So part of it is tracking bills that have any effect on the environment. So this is whether it's pro-environment or anti-environment, and just making sure we're there and giving our input on it. And also environmental news. So this is kind of a two-way street. So part of it is us telling what's going on in Springfield, but a lot of the times before we find out about an issue, it's coming from our groups that are talking about stuff happening on the ground. And then a lot of this work requires coordination, and in short, really coordination is just using limited resources in the most effective, efficient, and appropriate way so that we can collect those resources and make sure that our voice is actually heard. And the next part is building relationships with legislators like Representative Ford. And part of that is doing things like town halls, one-on-ones, and tours. We actually have a picture, might not be able to see it, but over here we actually went on a tour of a farm downstate. And like with any other relationship, part of it is holding folks accountable, right? So that leads into our environmental scorecard that we do every single year. And we basically score representatives and senators based on their voting record for environmental issues. And so in short, our priorities for 2020 is clean, affordable, and safe drinking water for all Illinoisans. And so how exactly does water get to your tap? Right, so you may have seen these like weird shaped things out in the middle of the lake. Those are water cribs. They're about 2 miles off of the lake shore, and they basically take water from the lake, pump it underneath the ground, and pump it into 2 different water treatment plants. So the Austin neighborhood in the west side of Chicago is served by the Jardine plant. You may have seen it. It's next to the Navy Pier. And so then it goes through this very, very technical process for about 8 hours, and then from there it's delivered to your home. And so once we get to the home, that's where we get the issue with lead, and that's where the lead problems begin. And so you'll see right here, this is actually a water main. So this is the part that's in the street underneath the ground. That does not contain lead. That water is just coming straight from the water treatment plant. But once you get here to this part right here, that is the service line. And so depending on when your home was built and what type of home it is, that part could be lead. And so I really wanted to highlight this part because this has been the biggest problem as far as like lead service line replacement, because part of it is owned by the city and another part is owned by the homeowner. So the issue with that is, you know, who is going to replace it, and like everything else in life, who's going to pay for it. So that's been the biggest issue, but overall, lead service lines are the greatest source of drinking water, of lead in our drinking water. And then also, if you have an older home, internal piping and fixture usually has lead in it too. And then disturbances in lead service lines. So I think Dr. Huggett hinted to that earlier about the meter save program, and it was suspended. So any disturbance to that lead service line can actually leak lead into the drinking water. And then I did want to highlight about University Park. Another cause of lead in drinking water is switching water sources. So University Park is about 40 miles south of Chicago. And they had switched their water source from groundwater to the Kankakee River. And it's a lot of technical chemistry things that happen, but switching from a different water supplies can actually disturb lead service lines as well. And so where are they? So Illinois has been blessed to have 1/8 of all lead service lines in the United States. And Chicago has been even more blessed by having 390,000 in our city. And if you have a single family, if you live in a single family or 2-flat home built before 1986, you most likely have a lead service line. And so Representative Ford, he has been a water champion and he's been a huge environmental advocate. We can't list all of the bills that we've worked with him on, but I will go a little bit over 3 of them. So the equitable water rate study is what he passed last session, and part of this is basically having the UIC study the water rate setting for northeastern Illinois and the rest of Illinois. And this is really important too because this issue is big in Chicago and not just Chicago alone. The Chicago Tribune about 2 years ago, they came out with a report, and within the last decade, the Department of Water Management had issued 150,000 water shutoff notices. And they found within that same study that those water shutoff notices were concentrated in low-income zip codes. And on top of that, those low-income zip codes and communities were likely to pay up to 6 times more for their water than their wealthy counterparts. And so this bill is really important because it's going to go into how is water rate setting and eventually lead into a more fair and just water rate system. And then there's a Preventing Lead in Drinking Water Act of 2015. You may be familiar, this is the bill that requires schools and daycares to test for lead in their drinking water. And then finally, the Lead Service Line Reduction Act, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. So it is Senate Bill 1532, House Bill 3035. For now, that may change. But basically, this bill will require municipalities, including Chicago, to come up with an inventory plan, so figuring out where are lead service lines and then coming up with a replacement plan. And this is making sure that it prioritizes lead-burdened communities. So, for example, if you take the Gold Coast, a lot of newer homes, large buildings, most likely don't have a lead service line. When you compare it to a neighborhood like Austin that has a lot of older single-family homes, and they usually have a lead service line. So this bill would make sure that we're going there first to see where the lead service lines are, and they're the first people to get their lead service lines replaced. And it also creates the low-income water affordability or water assistance program. So I don't know if folks are familiar with LIHEAP, but it would be modeled after that and basically assisting low-income customers with their water bill. And then finally, another piece of legislation we're pushing for is the lead testing in parks. So any park where there's a child present, which is all of them, having them test those water fountains. And so I am not a fan of giving people a bunch of problems and 0 solutions. You know, piece of legislation, that is one way to try to solve this problem, but I did want to provide some type of resources that you can do on your own. I really want to highlight that the city of Chicago does provide water testing kits, and they also, if it comes to find out that you do have a lot of lead in your drinking water, they will give you filters and replacements for it. And if you don't care if there's lead in it or not, you just want to filter your water, just make sure it's the National Science Foundation certified. So I might rush through that a little bit, but my name is Ayana again, and if you need to contact me, feel free to email me. I'll also be hanging around during the rest of the presentations, and if you have any questions, please just hold your card up in the air, or if you need a card, feel free to flag me down. And next up, we're gonna have Pastor Anque from we're gonna have Jeremy. We're gonna have Jeremy from NRDC.
Hey everyone, again, my name is Jeremy Orr. I'm with Natural Resources Defense Council, so I'm an attorney for our Safe Water Initiative. Our Safe Water Initiative is essentially NRDC's national drinking water program that deals with contamination in drinking water and affordability. So my job is to work on litigation and policy advocacy around securing clean, safe drinking water, and also getting predominantly lead contamination out of water, as well as trying to secure water as a legal human right in places. That's kind of our long-term goals. In addition to that, work on kind of low-income and affordability issues. For those of you who don't know NRDC, we're a 50-year-old organization that does environmental advocacy all over the country and actually internationally now. And I'm going to just talk a bit about my work as an attorney at NRDC, the work here in Illinois, and in particular the work in Michigan around the Flint water crisis and beyond that we gleaned a lot of lessons from, and hope can do some of that work here. So there are two main larger federal legal policies that govern drinking water, right? One is called the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the other one is the Lead and Copper Rule as it relates to getting lead out of our drinking water. So the Safe Drinking Water Act essentially just tells us, what do water systems and municipalities and whoever, is the distributor of our public water system, like what laws and rules they need to follow to make sure they're, the water that they're giving us is safe, and clean and potable, right, like drinkable. And then the Lead and Copper Rule gets more specific within that, Safe Drinking Water Act, and essentially says, these are the laws that govern lead and copper in our drinking water, and in particular, with lead kind of being the broader issue nationally that we see all over the country and that we're here to talk about tonight. And both of these laws are pretty old. I think the Lead and Copper Rule, I have a little asterisk by it. It got updated years ago, and Trump administration is in the process of updating it right now. As far as we're concerned, it's gotten worse, right? So we already kind of have crappy protections, and it's getting rolled back. So we're fighting to secure a stronger Lead and Copper Rule. And at the state level, so the way it kind of works is, you have these federal laws. The federal government they don't always have the capacity to enforce them. So they give the states the power to enforce the laws. So in Illinois, we have the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, IEPA, who's responsible for enforcing, the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Lead and Copper Rule within the state of Illinois, and of course directly within your communities. The problem with those laws are, let's start with some of the dangers. Well, I won't go through this too much because we talked about some of the dangers and health implications of having, lead in your water. It's a, dangerous neurotoxin. It affects multiple body systems, your brain, liver, kidney. It's stored in your teeth and bones. One of the things that we really stress when we talk about, vulnerable communities, in particular women, pregnant women and children and the elderly are really vulnerable to lead in drinking water, right? It becomes a source of exposure, in the fetus during pregnancy. And then as well, right, there's no level of lead, as we heard from the doctor earlier, like there is no level of lead that is safe, right? So we talked about flushing, as the representative mentioned, flushing for 5 minutes, and they said that'll get all the lead out, and he responded, well, all the lead, and then they corrected themselves and said, right, well, not all the lead, but some of it, right? Because there's legally, they can't be telling you it's going to get all the lead out because we know it won't, right? If it got all the lead out, you wouldn't have any of the issues that we're having in our communities today. Right, and the problem with those laws that I mentioned and some of the things that we just talked about was just that, they aren't strong enough, right? And I think that's where, some of the work that I do comes in. They aren't strong enough, they aren't health protective enough, the rules that are in place. They don't give legal remedies, right? So, even thinking of the Flint water crisis that's still existing, right? They had to go to court in order to determine whether they could even sue the state, right? So think about that. Like, I don't even have the right to sue you after you poison, like, my entire city. Right, so that's being litigated right now, and I work on some of those issues. And when it is enforced, right, the laws, like, it's poorly enforced, and a lot of that is due to lack of capacity from state agencies or federal government. I think another issue is that these laws and rules still prioritize profit over people, right? I think that's very clear, right, when you're willing to, in an instance, and I'll talk about it a bit more, in some instances allow, organizations or communities and even like municipal water systems to cut corners to save $1 to put your health at risk, like that's an issue. And then they're not equitably enforced. I know one of our staff scientists just released a national report that shows overwhelmingly, which is probably no surprise in this room, but Black and brown people face more, their water systems in their communities have more violations to drinking water than any other, right? So communities of color and low income communities as compared to white communities and more more better off, communities that are better off economically. So getting the lead out. So just to give a bit of example of some of the work that we do at NRDC, and we're hoping to translate to our work here with the Illinois Environmental Council and the representative on the bills that, being proposed. So, and I always use Flint as a prime example because that's the one that most people know. That's the one that really hit pretty hard and is still in the media today and kind of prompted so many of these discussions, right? And I preface that by saying, Flint didn't happen in a silo, right? Like Flint is happening everywhere, right? Especially in our communities. But the question is, how do we deal with it? So when the Flint water system, ended up poisoning, thousands of black and brown low-income residents in Flint, Michigan, the issue that came up was that, as I mentioned, the water system tried to cut corners by not using corrosion control. Literally, we're talking about saving just a few dollars a day for a multi-million-dollar water system so that they could, save a few bucks. The lack of that corrosion control that they would have put in, ended up allowing the corrosive water to erode the lead pipes and poison essentially, an entire city. And that sounds right. That's insane. So what we did at NRDC was we sued the city of Flint, the state of Michigan, using the Safe Drinking Water Act. So I mentioned that lawsuit, or that Safe Drinking Water Act, doesn't normally provide remedies. We figured out a creative way to bring a class action suit to force the city and the state to replace every single lead service line in the city of Flint. Like, that's never happened before. We're using those same techniques in New Jersey and other places around the country to see what we can leverage to make sure that lead service lines are getting out of the ground. So we actually won that. We won a $100 million lawsuit. There's a number of attorneys who oversee the replacement of all lead service lines in Flint. I'll cover one portion of it. And we're near done with all the replacement of the lead service lines in Flint. One of the other things that came out of that kind of emergency was, we saw it as an opportunity to say, okay, the law sucks, we need to change the law so this doesn't happen again in Michigan or anywhere else. And we use Michigan as kind of what we would consider a gold standard or a template of hopes that we can do this work elsewhere. And what we did was revise our lead and copper rule, and that's kind of what's being proposed here that the representative talked about, taking like realistic action on regulating lead in our drinking water. And what the revised lead and copper rule did that we secured in Michigan successfully was it lowered the lead action level so that if there's a trigger, so I think right now the lead action level federally is what we call 15 parts per billion. So unless there's 15 parts per billion in your water, nobody has to do anything about notifying you or fixing your water, right? Simple as that. So in Michigan, we lowered that to 10 parts per billion to make that lead action level much lower and require that municipalities actually do something when there's water in your system. Other thing we did was required a service line inventory, which means all water systems have to figure out how many lead service lines are in their community, where they are, and then from that come up with a plan on how to get rid of them. And this is kind of the big kicker for this work, to have been able to do this, and hopefully to be able to do this in Illinois as well, is we secure a full lead service line replacement. So every lead service line in the state of Michigan has to get replaced, right? And that has to be done in a 20-year time frame. At 5% per year. So every water system has to be coming every year showing that I replace 5% of my lead service lines, or else you'll face a penalty. In addition to that, we put a ban on partial lead service line replacement. As we found out, like Ayana talked about, there's a point where there's a pipe that runs up to your house that we would consider on the private side, that there's debate around whether who owns it or not, but more than that, who pays for it. And then there's a public side that we know for sure the municipality has to pay for. What some water systems will do is simply replace their side and not deal with your side. And what we know from science is that causes more damage because it disrupts and shakes loose all of the lead on your private side that have maybe otherwise have been dormant for years. Once that construction happens, it shakes it loose, and all that lead goes into your house. Yep, so we banned partial lead service line replacement in Michigan as well, and required that they must replace the private side of it. And the big thing we did in Michigan, which we're trying to figure out the best way to do it here, is that this is at no cost to the resident, right, on the private side, right? So, and that doesn't mean that you won't see some sort of distributed like cost, but if there is a cost, everybody bears that cost, right? So nobody's going to show up to your house or the house of a person of color or a low-income person and say, you got to pay $8,000 out of pocket right now, or else your lead service line won't get replaced. Because that's what happened in D.C. about 10 years ago, and we're seeing the impacts of it now. All the wealthy white communities in D.C. got their lead service lines replaced. All the poor black communities in D.C. 10 years later, like, basically haven't even started. The city, right, hasn't even started because those residents can't afford it. And that's what we don't want to happen here in Illinois, and in particular in Chicago. If folks don't know, Chicago has the most lead service lines in the country, and Illinois has the most lead service lines in the state. I think we're bordering somewhere. I think the city of Chicago may be close to 500,000, with the state of Illinois having close to anywhere from 730,000 to 1 million lead service lines. I mean, like, that's a lot, right? But it creates an opportunity for Illinois to be the leader and Chicago to be the leader on how to deal with lead in drinking water, right? You have the biggest problem. Like, how about we find the biggest and best solution that we can take, everywhere, build on some of the work that we've done in other places like Michigan and try to win on that here. And then lastly, of course, we won on that. Water systems, municipalities sued. We defended that law in court this past year in Michigan. Literally, we took heat from every single municipality and water system and mayors, you name it, all filed a lawsuit, and we were able to defend that lawsuit successfully and actually get the court to say, yep, you have to pay for it. That's not the resident's responsibility, and you have to do it in this time frame, which was, a big win that, is going to move us in the right direction nationally. And then I think just, as in a closing, like we try to, promote just a gold standard on how we do lead and drinking water work. And for us, looking at, things we would like to see, around the country, in particular in Illinois, and any bills or rules or like legislation that's coming up, just, a lower, more protective lead action level. Again, for lead service line replacement. One thing we also did in Michigan was prioritize the most vulnerable communities. So literally, when they're replacing lead service lines, they have to have a plan that says, okay, we're going to go in the community that's hardest hit, and we know the hardest hit communities are black and brown and low-income communities. So they have to show up with a plan that prioritizes that. Again, looking at legislation that hopefully bans partial lead service line replacement, and make it so that it's no cost to the individual homeowner, right? And that if there is a cost, it's distributed amongst all, ratepayers in that regard. And then, completing this stuff in a timely manner, right? And I don't know what that timeline looks like in Illinois. I know it's with the most lead service lines. It'll be a big task, but it's a task that I think, we're up to the challenge for, and we could successfully do. So again, my name is, Jeremy Ure. I'm an attorney with Natural Resource Defense Council, and happy to answer any questions once that portion comes.
Okay, next up we have Pastor Anque from Faith in Place.
Good evening. I'd like to applaud and appreciate our Representative Ford for even having this town hall around lead in water. We know that it's a very important issue. I'm Pastor Scott Anque, the Policy Director for Faith in Place, a 20-year organization that has been promoting advocacy around environmental justice. Simply, why do we advocate? We advocate because we know that it's important for voices to be heard, and so there is only so much that we can do as individuals or houses of worship. We must change policies, systems to create the world that we want to live in: clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. Now, we actually connect with people of faith throughout the whole state, and so we advocate for environmental justice. And so when we advocate, it's because we care. We actually care, and we care, and I partner with representatives like Representative Ford because he cares. He cares for his community. He cares about the people he serves. So Faith in Place vision is diverse people of all faith leading environmental movement towards justice. You'll hear that a lot around Faith in Place because we advocate justice. Faith in Place empowers people of Illinois of all faiths to be leaders in caring for the earth, providing resources to educate, connect, and advocate for healthier communities. And so this is why I'm here tonight. When you view the lens of social justice, environmental justice seems to intersect with the injustices that affect people of color and the least amongst the most, whether it's land or air pollution, water justice, lead pipes, food scarcity, or any other environmental issue. There must be an intentional effort to correct these injustices. And that's a quote by little old me. So when we talk about justice, and this is why we're here tonight, because in order to pass legislation, these are heavy lifting legislations that we're trying to pass. They're not easy. And so we need to create a conversation around justice. And I like to describe justice as an umbrella of overarching construct. So where we live, where we play, where we pray, go to school, recreate, and interact with others, it means equity and distributive justice, meeting people where they are, determining what their needs to be are to be safe as well as healthy. So there are various parts that make up that umbrella, including climate justice, civil rights, criminal justice, economic justice, housing justice, water justice, food justice, as well as the important issues that are incorporated in our environment. So we advocate, And advocacy is just simply defined as any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. And so the most important or most effective advocacy is done around issues you are passionate about. I'm passionate about clean water. I'm passionate about making sure that lead's not in water, because we've connected the dots. And the dots say that when the doctor was up here, he explained all of the issues that are happening because of lead. But a further dot is connecting lead to criminality. When we think about crime in our neighborhoods, when it's all connected. And so we have to make sure that we speak up. And so I just say we deserve healthy water. That's really what it's all about. And so there are bills that are going to address this. I've been happened to be placed as a co-chair on the Mayor's Environmental Council to talk about how we move forward with getting lead out of the water, lead service lines. It's going to take some heavy lifting, as I said, and so we need to get the lead out. How does lead get into our drinking water? Although sometimes found in natural deposits near drinking water sources, lead contamination generally occurs from the corrosion of lead pipes, either between the water main and a customer's home, which we talked about, lead service lines, or in homes or buildings' plumbing systems. Even in homes not served by lead service lines, corrosive water may cause lead to leach from lead pipes, lead solder, or brass fixtures. Understanding what the problem is causes us to get into action. But I look at action as three parts. There's self-responsibility, there's corporate responsibility, and then there's government responsibility. And so we're motivated, and we must be motivated to take action. So let's look at personal responsibility. Am I doing my part? Well, tonight you are doing your part, because you're here, you're listening, you're trying to get educated so that you'll be aware of how that bill looks, and then how you can do and help the representative get that bill past the finish line. Because again, it's not going to be one voice, it's going to be a collective, a collection of voices that do it. So your personal responsibility as a faithful citizen, or we call it faithful citizen engagement, is talking to your legislators. This is the district for Rep. Ford. If you're in a different district, you want to speak to them, but you have a senator, you also have a governor, and you want to speak to them. So you can do in-district visits, State House Capitol visits. We're going down to the Capitol for clean energy on March 4th. That's an opportunity for you to come to town hall meetings such as this. Call your legislators, let them know that this is important to you, so when he gets into those tough fights in committee, he knows he's speaking for the people that really care about this. Send your witness slips down. That's important, because when a bill is about to be passed out of committee, those witness slips are counted, and so it gives them a greater voice. If we have 100 witness slips for it and 2 witness slips against it, his voice gets larger in the committee. So we heard some legislation or some policies around water bills. Now, how many can say they hate that water bill coming? Well, the city wants to help you, really. They really do. And so in doing that, there's a low-income customer, as a low-income customer, will be eligible for reduced water rates and help paying water and sewage bills under the city's new utility billing relief program. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced details of the program a few Fridays ago after announcing it in her budget address last month. So, in order to qualify, this is how simple it is. If you are owner of a single-family home or 2-flat, you must have income low enough to qualify for Illinois' low-income home energy assistance program, which helps residents with their winter heating bills, reside at the address, and have their name on the bill as a customer. And I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute so you can get the information. The city is partnering with the Community and Economic Development Association on this program. For more information, email utilitybillrelief@ceda.org.net or text water bill to 313131 or call 312-795-8946. Details are also available online at www.chicago.gov/UBR. Hopefully this information was helpful to you. Again, I can be reached here at faithinplace.org or faithinplaceaction.org. I am the policy director for Faith in Place. My number 312-733-4640, extension 119. I'll turn it back over to you. Sure. Okay. I'll leave that up while she's coming.
Okay. And then finally, we have our final speaker, Rebecca Raines from Chicago West Side NAACP. Did everybody get a chance to get a picture of it? You can leave it up. Okay.
Thank you. I have so many things swimming around in my head right now. I think I might be the bearer of bad news. I haven't heard anyone speak a whole lot about affordability. And so as we start talking about lead and water, it comes straight down to a money issue. And I want to make sure that we all understand some of the things that have been discussed. It's kind of important to me that people understand exactly what we're thinking about, because one thing, so I come from the NAACP. I'm the environmental chair for the NAACP on the West Side. But I also work for a nonprofit called the Center for Neighborhood Technology. And I spend my whole day talking about people and flooding. And I mostly say to people here in our Chicago region that we're a water-rich community, and so people have a tendency to turn that water on and to leave it on and just let it run, especially because so much of our population rents. They're not paying a water bill, and so we don't consider our water. But when we let that water run, it's great if we get our 5 minutes of letting that lead flush out. But when it starts running on for that 10 minutes, 20 minutes while we letting the water get hot, that water goes down the drain and it has the opportunity to flood us, okay? It comes back up through the sewer, and so that's one set of lines that we have through. The other set of lines is our drinking water. So if this is our house and this floor is the street, then you have this line right here that runs between those two things. This line, and I heard Jeremy say it's a little bit of a debate, from like here, maybe down to this socket down here, is going to be called the private line. And the city is confident that that belongs to you. And that means that it's your job to replace it. And it's going to be the solder that they use to connect those pipes. That's where the lead exists. And as that pipe goes across those crevices and those turns on those pipes, that's where the lead is able to seep out. So if you start talking about replacing this line costs about, on average, across the nation, about $6,000 to replace. And a lot of us don't have it, but the city doesn't necessarily have it either. We pay the city through our taxes, and that's how they get their money to do whatever they're going to do. So the question is, how do we as citizens, as we start talking about our responsibility, where do we want our tax dollars to go? And that's where we become responsible to go to them and say, this is how our water, our money should be used, because maybe water is our first priority. And part of the research that I wanted to do last year that I wasn't successfully able to find the funding for was to connect lead to violence, because I also do criminal justice for the NAACP. And we all pretty much believe that lead has a contributing factor to our violence issue, but nobody knows any numbers. Nobody knows, oh, this certain amount goes into the brain, it leaches out through the bone, and this is, if you have people who have this level of contamination in their blood, they're more likely to do these set of violent crimes. And if we can kind of connect those one thing to the other in a data numbers kind of way, then we have the opportunity to say it's not only a public health issue, it's a public safety issue. And now all of the money that we're spending on public safety, we need to reroute to the $6,000 per house that needs to go into replacing these lines. We need to start being creative as citizens to say, we understand this problem, we understand the money behind it, and this is how we want our money to be rerouted to get to our priorities. Because if we fix our water issue, we fix some of our crime issue, and so it has a double benefit. Shamika has her hand up. Is it time? Ayana, may I take questions? Go ahead, Shamika.
You mentioned crime. Is it really a mental health behavioral issue that results in crime?
So because I haven't been able to get the research going, I don't know exactly, and I don't think anybody knows from all the lead professionals that I've spoken to, exactly what lead does in your body. But there's some indication that it sits in the bones leaches it out to the brain, and that it causes certain parts of your brain not to develop.
A mental health issue.
So definitely a mental health issue, and so, right, parts of your brain are not developing, you're not able to get the proper education growing up, and so you don't have as much opportunity to go out and take care of yourself or your family. And so that's one issue. And then two, if parts of that brain isn't developing, then you don't have the cognitive ability to say, you know what, this is a bad decision to do this. Maybe I shouldn't.
It's like cyanide that you just...
Lead, kind of, yeah. You take a little bit every day. It takes a certain level into the body, and like they said, there's no safe level in the blood system, and nobody can really figure out how lead is stored in the body. That's not like known, unless the doctor wants to correct me, and what it does once it's in there.
Why hasn't that been studied?
I think that people have tried to study it in different ways, but I just don't think it's something that they're able to pinpoint exactly what it does and how it works. That's just from the research that I was trying to do as I was trying to get this process going. So I'm not a doctor. I want to make sure everybody knows. Okay? But I do want to say that water waste is an issue because it costs us money. Lead line replacement is an issue because it costs us money, and the way that we think about it. So we do have people who are ignoring issues, and they're spending our money. And I want to take this opportunity to get on Nestle, okay? Because a lot of us are buying Nestle bottled water saying that, oh, we don't want to get lead out of our sinks. We want to treat our municipal water like it's dirty. And we're not going to drink water from the faucet, so we're just going to go spend all of our money buying bottles of water. Not only is plastic terrible for the environment, and the process of getting that plastic from the plant to our homes, terrible for the environment, but that water that you're buying, especially if you're buying it from Nestle, so an article came out last year that said that they spent $200 in the state of Michigan to pump that water out of the ground. That's all they paid, $200 for the year. They pump Michigan's water ground supply. They're pumping it nearly dry. They're taking that water, they're putting it into their plastic bottles, and then they're selling it to the people in Flint for what? $3 for a case of it? And this is the only water that they're using to drink? That's like robbery. And they're doing these kinds of water practices in California where they're experiencing droughts and groundwater is super expensive. They're doing it across the world in India. They're closing off wells and making those people not able to get to their own natural resources. So I want us to also think that bottled water is not the answer to this problem. We do need to consider our pipes and how we put those in, and we do need to create water coalitions that deal with drinking water and stormwater and say this is an issue on two sides that's costing us as individuals money. We need to know how our tax dollars are going to come back to us and rectify this issue so that we're not flooding ourselves trying to get to clean water and then having to deal with that flood issue on the background. Ayana, have I used my time? Oh, I'm sorry. And all of that relates back to water affordability. So I've done a little bit of study in that people just can't afford their water. Water is a right. I believe it's a human right. That's not absolutely defined across our nation, but water is a human right, and if we can't get to it, some of that water waste and all of that, even the replacement of these drinking water lines, if we told the city, okay, you just do it, all they're going to do is take the cost of that and redistribute it to us, our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren to replace these lines. So it's something that we have to consider, and we have to really put all of our brains on in order to fix that issue. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
My name is Cynthia Davis. I work for Austin People Action Center, and this is my question. I have 2 kids at home. They moved from DC 3 years ago. My daughter took them for their regular checkup. I got a call, state The nurse came in and said their levels were high. I've been living there 25 years. The kids had not been there that long. So I had to, they didn't test my water. They had someone come in for the water, the inspector. He found I had lead in the corn in the dog way away. He said I could have walked it in on my feet. So, but they didn't test my water, and I had to spend $3,000 to get painted my house because my grandkids' level was high. Was it high before they came to my house? And are they actually checking them? I mean, I had to pay for that, but my water was never checked. So I'm concerned is, are we not just looking at the water, or are we looking at our homes? Have lead in them, or do they have lead?
So lead is in a lot of places.
Yeah, so our kids
Lead is in,
eventually by that.
right, lead is in water, lead is in paint, lead is even said to be in dirt, and children play in dirt. And so as it blows up into their faces, they possibly are getting it. So chances are all of us have lead in our bodies. We got it at some point at there. When you get it as a small child, that's when it has its most negative effects in your development phases. If you talk to some health authorities, because they don't want to pay for the replacement of these lines, they'll tell you that it's strictly a paint issue. And they will replace, tell you you just need to repaint your homes or rip up all your lead paint and replace it, and they won't address your water because water is much more expensive than paint.
But I mean, what I'm saying, I didn't get that option to know whether or not it was the water. And I have a meter.
Cynthia, I'll tell you that city did say that they would come out and test water. So they will come out. I think people should know that the city will test your water and test for lead levels.
But how do you know if it's really the water or if it's maybe lead in your house?
I don't think that you can identify I mean, you would have to test every known factor of lead. So you would have to test your paint. You would have to test your water. You might have to test your dirt to find out exactly where it is. And it is possible that they came from wherever they were living before. They were already getting those lead levels because once lead gets into the body, it really doesn't get out. So they could have gotten it, like you said, before they came to your house. You would want to test it. The city is offering, from what I understand, free lead filters. So the best way to get around this, if you can't replace your service line, is to buy a lead filter, and all the water that you drink and all the water that you cook with goes through that filter. One thing that I learned when I did a little stint in Flint last year is that when you cook water, the lead heightens. It heightens the levels of it. So if you're just taking your cooking water and you think, well, I'm going to boil it, so it's going to be fine. No, it makes the lead levels worse. So you want to make sure that you're using a filter that says that it eradicates lead, and use that for your drinking water and your cooking water. I think as far as on the skin, the showers, as long as you're not taking 30-minute showers, you should be okay, even if there is a little lead in your water.
If your child got it from the water or from paint?
You won't, once it gets into the body, there's no way of knowing, but if I were you, I would test both of those sources.
All that's been done, but I had to pay $3,000 for a paint job, and maybe it wasn't.
And it might not.
It could have been the lead in the water.
It might have been.
Yeah, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I
You
just
would want to,
followed
you would want to test every time. You would want to test all your sources before you pay money.
But I didn't know because they didn't test the water. So I'm just concerned how many residents have had to pay to get a paint job that really maybe it was just the water.
And I think that that's why organizations like community organizations like us exist, is because we are trying to tell people, you know, somebody might just be trying to get your money, and they might be helping you fix a problem you don't have. And you definitely want to spend your money fixing the problem that you have. So, yeah, the right thing to do would have been to test all sources first.
The lead came and did this. He checked it for me, so I did not.
There is a movement to blame it on lead rather than blame it on water.
Okay.
I'm just going to
That's
tell
what I
you
just
that.
wanted to find
There
out.
are groups out there who want to kind of ignore lead in water and say it's only in your paint.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We have a question right there.
Yeah, my name is Prince. I'm from Ado, Chicago.
You should get. Okay.
Speaking to the mic. Okay. So again, my name is Prince, or Jawad Hashim Hakeem, from Ado, Chicago. The main thing that we're concerned with is that water is a human right. And when you say it's a human right, then we have to start looking at the position of the mayor of Chicago. The mayor of Chicago just went through something that was very strenuous for her newly elected position, which was the Chicago teacher strike. And she said, with Dr. Janice Jackson, we don't have the money. So how much can we ask when the city says, we have an $800 million hole in our budget? We don't have the money. So we just got through the Chicago's teacher strike. What we gonna do, start striking about, get the lead out? Where's the money gonna come from? The city and the mayor have finite resources. But if it's a human right, we are in a presidential campaign season. If it's a human right, and we're talking about Medicare for all, which is listed at 32 to 38 trillion, or Andrew Yang policies, which are a combined 56 trillion. So the booming economy is producing a lot of great solutions for everybody. But I haven't heard one candidate saying, oh, part of my campaign is we're going to get the lead out for everyone. So my question is, have we come out with a different, or organization, NAACP, with what you're doing, with Representative Ford, have we come out with a total itemized cost of what it will cost to get all the lead service lines replaced in the state of Illinois? Once we have that cost, it's not the responsibility of the mayor of Chicago or just Governor Pritzker alone. It's a human right. So now we have to get federal involved. So we just want to know the cost, because ADO Chicago, we are a lobbying group, and we're going to put the pressure on. And my last comment, because we have to leave, we have a 7:30 conference we have to be part of as ADO Chicago. We want to just clarify, since we're here, that when we say black and brown, or when we say people of color, or when we say minorities, ADOS is saying support HB 4260, which is in the Illinois legislature, where we are asking to define our own category as who we are. We are American descendants of slavery, and we are asking for basic human rights, the same basic human rights slaves were after. And so lead and getting lead out is another human rights issue that ADO Chicago is going to be on top of. We're just thankful that Representative Ford had this town hall and all the various partners that are here. But we're going to stay on this issue, even though we're about to walk out. We're going to stay on this issue. It was already broadcast at ADO's television. We keep everyone abreast on what's going on. But just keep that in mind. We are American descendants of slavery. We're not people of color. We're not black and brown. We want our equity, and we want it defined. And we're going to stay on this issue and getting lead out. We're going to work with Representative Ford.
So ADOS is again, what is it?
ADOS is, again, American descendants of slavery. We were formerly called African Americans. We were formerly called black. This is ADOS History Month. Thank you, guys.
Let me address this question real quick. Yes, there has been there has been extensive study on the cost it will take to replace all of the lead service lines throughout the whole state of Illinois. The legislation that's being promoted in Springfield talks about the costs anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 per service line. And I don't have those numbers right here, but the numbers have been figured out, and the cost has been figured out, and the proposed how to pay for it has been figured out also.
And for the city, I think the city is estimating about to be $8 billion. $8 billion. Right. That's one number. Okay. Any other questions on Remy? Here, you got to come up. Remy's coming up. You're from the NAACP, right? Yeah. All right.
Good evening, everyone. Ramel Terry from Chicago Westside NAACP. I serve as the second vice and political action chair. So my question was to the attorney. As it relates to the Safe Drinking Water Act, is it at all vulnerable right now, considering that people aren't really as focused on addressing this issue? And it is an act, so it isn't like an official law, so to speak. So is it at all vulnerable to be taken away, or, you know?
So the Safe Drinking Water Act is law, right? So that's codified. That's gone through kind of the, through Congress. So that's law. The one that is vulnerable, however, is the second one, which was the lead and copper rule. So that one, a presidential administration can come in, appoint their EPA administrator and say, I want you to do this. And what this president and administration has done is said, I want you to roll back all environmental protections, essentially, right? And right now, what's under review is this lead and copper rule, which we, essentially the nexus of lead poisoning. And they proposed about a month ago to roll back protection, so to make it harder to replace lead service lines, to make it harder to fund, the replacement of lead service lines, to actually, I think it was, to not lower the lead action level. So it's been, 15 parts per billion since the beginning, since this thing was created. Here we are decades later, and they're saying, you know what, we're not going to go with good science. We're going to just keep all this stuff the same and actually make it easier for, your water to be contaminated, right? So that's the place where I think, our laws that protect us are really vulnerable, is when you get into that administrative space where a president or at the state level a governor can say, I want to take, steps to roll back these regulations, or in some instances when you have somebody who's looking to protect communities, make them stronger. So we're on the side of proposing rules to make it stronger. And for us, there's a federal law that says you can't roll back, you can't make these laws weaker. So if we get to the space where this administration federally says we're going to roll back the lead and copper rule, we're primed to sue for that.
Okay. My name is Tiffany Lane. I work as a facilitator. I'm a science teacher as well as work as a facilitator for an after-school program called Project Exploration. Have you heard of it? Okay. So recently, as facilitators, we're looking for research. In my case, I look for research in my field of what type of activities that I'm going to do with my youth that I facilitate over. Recently, we read an article by the University of Chicago stating they found 160 species within the Great Lakes. Do your office, are you familiar with it? Is there anything that you are doing to help to ensure, other than lead, to ensure that our waters are safe?
So I'm not familiar with it. We definitely do. We have a completely separate department that does wildlife protection and species protection, as well as invasive species. And I could definitely take it to them and make them aware of it. So my scope of work is specifically drinking water, source to tap, but we absolutely have a whole department that does stuff like that.
The Great Lakes is 48 million people drinking water.
Yep. No, absolutely. Thank you.
The doctor has to leave. Can you hold it? So I just wanted, before Dr. Huggett had to leave, if he could just advise parents. It's a state law that you have to have a test, right, for lead. What should parents do if their kids are tested positive, and what should people be doing, if you could just.
Yes, thank you, Rep. Well, anybody who's a parent knows that the kids have to get lead tested, right? If you're going to see your doctor, your pediatrician. So that's really part of just general medical care for all children, really. If lead levels are elevated, of course, the doctor's office or the provider is by law, they have to report that to the local Department of Health. For us, it's CDPH. At certain levels, they will go out and do inspections for the house. Most of it is actually true that it is looking more for lead paint type issues. They'll go to the doors, they'll go to the windows, they'll go to the floors, especially, and do lead samples. They have, in one of the reports from CDPH looking at this, since 2016 through 2019, they did look at lead in water in cases where kids had elevated lead levels. And it seemed to be that it was a little bit less of an issue with the water and a little bit more issue with the paint and that. But the problem is that, the paint is such a large issue for when there is lead poisoning in children, that even those smaller lead levels in water tend to get overwhelmed by the lead in the paint. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we're not trying to say that lead in water is a safe issue. We know from all the evidence that's been presented that there is no safe lead level. If a kid does have lead poisoning, there is treatment for it, and we encourage that. I've treated several kids with that. It's EDTA or Chemet, and it's what it is. It's a chelator that the child takes, and it actually binds the lead up to get it out of the system, and it's quite a process while that's happening. So that there is treatment for that, but it really is just part of well child care to make sure that children are tested for lead.
Thank you.
Can you just talk about what are the symptoms of lead poisoning? Like, what do they know what to look for?
You just got to repeat that.
Yeah. Hi, what are the symptoms of lead poisoning? Like, what do the parents know to look for? Teachers, caregivers? We don't know what we don't know, but if we do know, we know what to look for.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Probably 90% of the time, there will be no symptoms. So that's what's so scary about this. So a kid can have a very high lead level, and they might, there may not be something that's identified. For the very, very high levels, there will be some behavioral issues. They may be more sluggish. Sometimes they'll be sleeping more. So those are for the extremely high levels that I saw in Chicago and in Baltimore when I was working there. We just aren't really seeing that anymore. We saw that certainly in the 80s and the 90s, but the incidence has really decreased. It used to be that in the 1990s, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there were up to 25% of our children had elevated and high lead levels that sometimes they actually need to be treated. Now it's less than 1%. So we've really made, by making sure that we get after landlords to make sure that we get rid of the paint, lead paint. Also, lead paint in the homes. Lead paint was banned after 1978, so all of the new paint really does not have any lead in it. The other thing that was very important is lead in gasoline. So what was very interesting is that they were seeing of all of the houses along the Eisenhower, along 290, how high their lead levels were in comparison to some miles away from that. Isn't that interesting? So that was directly due to lead in the gasoline. Well, now we don't have lead in the gasoline. So there have been a lot of environmental protections. Right, isn't that interesting? So that was a very interesting type of a study. But it's really incumbent upon us now, in our generation, for our children, is to really make sure that we're doing what we can to work with our lawyers and our environmental advocates to really make sure that our lead service lines are really taken care of so that our children are not exposed, even in small amounts, to water, to lead in the water, because we know there's no safe level.
I just wanted to respond very quickly to your question about protecting the water in the Great Lakes and invasive species. So IEC, we've been working with the governor's office to push through this project called the Brandon Road Project. And part of this would be trying to prevent Asian carp. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very aggressive fish that not only is it bad just because for biodiversity reasons, but they're actually very dangerous and they jump and they can injure people. We took a representative downstate a few years ago to do Asian carp, and he actually broke his nose because it jumped out of the water and hit him. So we're doing the Brandon Road Project. If you want more information about that, feel free to talk to me afterwards. And then we're also going to introduce the census people.
Thank you. I think it's important when we talk about bringing money back, and it's going to cost $8 billion just for the city. It's probably going to cost a lot more, billions for the entire state. So it's important that everyone is counted, because the word is that the more population we have counted in the state and the city, the more revenue you bring in. So we have someone here from the census that wanted to say a few words right now. But it's important. I think that each person could bring thousands of dollars to the state of Illinois. The numbers vary, so I'm not going to say numbers that I've heard, but the census might.
Hello, I am Gloria Riley, and I represent the NAACP on the West Side. And the census is very important. There's almost 700 and I want to say $1 billion, it might be trillion, that is due to or slated to go into the communities as the individuals are counted in the census. And so it's very important that each one of us are counted from the age 0 till the age nothing. So that means any ages and all ages, and especially children, because over the past 10 years, the state of Illinois lost a lot of money because many of the children, especially in hard to count areas, were not counted. And so there's a lot of money that comes to the communities when the government knows that we are here. So we want to make sure that we're here. Back here on the table is a lot of other literature for the census. This is a QR code card, which if you have a photo on your phone, you can just kind of scan over it, and it'll bring up a website that you could tap. And then what it is it gives you that sheet, just a fill-out sheet that asks for your name, your address, your email, your phone number. And then that way you will receive any and all information that's coming down the pike about the 2020 census. It'll come directly to you via email, phone, or mail, so you can make sure that when that application or that postcard comes to you letting you know to do the census come April 1st, you will be reminded of it, because a lot of times people are not even getting the information. We implore you to share this information with anybody. One card, a bunch of people can use it, anybody can use it. All they have to do is hover over it, scan it, and then that form will come up on your phone. This is like the quickest way, because technology is what it is. People are using their phones for everything. So please try to get them to do this to anybody you know, your family members, your friends, and anybody. They can do it really simply by just making sure they fill this Q card. This is not the census application. This is just to make sure that you are informed so that you can receive all the information you need to so that you can complete the application.
I just want to say a comment about the census. Okay. As we talk about affordability with water, and we talk about the federal government needs to be a part of this process so that we can afford new lines, we have to talk about the census, because that is how we're counted, and each of us are worth $1,400 every year. And so when that money comes down, that's to pay for resources like replacing our lead service lines or everything else that we need. If we're not counted, then they say there's not as many people there, they don't need those resources in that place, and that money is diverted elsewhere. And so it's really important that, like this little sign with this baby on it is cute, that every person born on April 1st gets counted so that that money comes to the places where it belongs.
And just a few closing remarks. Like, thank you all for being here. Thanks again for Rep 4 for just like hosting us. This is such an important issue in our community, but then like nationwide. And like I just implore you all to keep showing up, right? Like that's part of the process. Like the Reverend talked about personal accountability, right? Like just keep showing up. Like my background was in community organizing before I got into law, right? And it was constantly like just getting people to show up, take action. So when these bills come across the legislature and he introduces a bill and he says he needs you to lobby or needs you to call your legislator, right, or your state senator or whoever the case, your city council person, like that's the only way this stuff is going to happen. Like keep putting pressure on the people who are responsible for making these decisions and just keep coming out. And thank you for putting it together.
Any announcements from the public? Anybody want to announce they won the lotto or something? All this? You ain't gonna pay for all our work, right? If not,
thank you again for everybody coming out, and thank you for the Westside Health Authority for hosting us. And everybody enjoy the rest of their night and stop buying water bottles.